but the New York Times, kind of being the behemoth of media, I would imagine that they were reluctant to open their doors for such kind of unfettered access that you had.
Well, it did take about 6 months of meetings and discussions about my approach to the subject. I mean, basically, I was inspired to make Page One at a moment of sort of apocalyptic distress in print media, when people were actually speculating that the New York Times could go out of business because of the decline in advertising. And a lot of very smart people were saying there's a digital revolution underfoot, and there's going to be a lot of dead bodies on the side of the road, and that's just the way it goes. And that, to me, seemed like a very curious position for these people to take. And so I thought it would be interesting to just go inside the walls of a place like the Times, and it could have been the Journal or the Washington Post or Reuters or AP, and see what these folks are doing day in and day out. Does it look like it's foolishly, sort of they're spending too much money, it's a bloated enterprise, or, do they seem like they're doing their jobs, well, and is there a value in the craft that they are pursuing? So when I approached the New York Times, I said, this is really meant to be an observational documentary in the tradition of cinema verite. It's, I'm not going in with a sort of satirical angle like The Daily Show to sort of make fun, or with an agenda. It's really just meant to capture what's happening and organize it in a, hopefully as entertaining manner as possible for people to make up their own minds. And I guess they felt comfortable with that. Bill Keller, the executive editor, said to me, I'm proud of my journalists, and I'd like the world to see what they do.
Tell me about the process of making a documentary, because you just explained your goals with the documentary when you were setting out. How did the film that you ended up with differ from what you set out to make?
I think that a lot of documentary film is just trying to be, in the right place at the right time. And so this film was always conceived of as a sort of play within a play, meaning that all the writers on the media desk are creating these stories that tell us about different aspects of the media landscape, while the life of the New York Times itself and its, whether they will implement a paywall, whether they have to do layoffs, is a sort of macro play or story. So in a certain respect, I knew that over the course of about a year, a lot of decisions were going to be made at the New York Times, and so those things would unfold, and I would just follow them. And then also that these writers would be coming up with stories that I would just capture, and the sort of the kicker of their stories, the conclusions to their stories would tell us something about the media, but then also watching them actually produce those stories, like the sheer craft of the process of writing and reporting, that would also give us some insight. So it was really just a question of being there, and then of course, lo and behold, here comes WikiLeaks, leaking a video of journalists in Baghdad getting gunned down by an American military helicopter, and suddenly WikiLeaks makes this big splash. And then months later, the New York Times is actually publishing information that WikiLeaks is leaking in the Afghan war logs, and then later in the state secrets. And then, as part of the carnage taking place in print media, the Tribune Company went through bankruptcy, and David Carr reported on that story, and Sam Zell emerged as sort of presiding over this really bankrupt culture. And that was another story that sort of really told us a lot about where people's heads are at in the media world.
And what do you think with the other kind of emerging media and papers in crisis, the traditional newspaper, what do you think we're in danger of losing?
I think, one of the real insights I gained from making the film was the importance of editors and a team of writers coming together on a daily basis to create those original stories, all the resources that are a part of that, whether it's boots on the ground in places like Baghdad, where Tim Ranga, one of the characters, ends up moving to and becoming the bureau chief of. It's seeing that sort of the team that comes together to produce that daily miracle of the newspaper. And so I think, when we look at the incredible benefits of the online world and all the tools that allow us to get information from different news sources, I think it's some of those standards and practices that places like the Times and other newspapers like it, and places like AP and Reuters again, CNN, places like that, what they're doing is truth squatting information in a way that has been honed over many years, and there's benefits to that, and I think that's one of the things that we hope viewers come away with a newfound passion for, concern for.
It kind of reminds me, because things always change. If there's one thing that's inevitable, it's change, and everyone kind of throws up the apocalyptic signs when an old form is dying and a new form is going to take over. And we've seen it in the film world too. The world that you come from. Do you think that there will be a time soon where the newspaper will be no more, the daily newspaper you hold in your hand?
Well, I think that's a really good question, but to me the answer is that it may ultimately be irrelevant what the platform is that we're getting the journalism from. Meaning, if it's a tablet computer or if it's my cell phone, my smartphone, that's not as important as making sure that the quality journalism survives. And currently, the way that it does survive is because advertisements in the physical newspaper are so expensive. They're able to charge a lot for that Tiffany's ad on the top of the third page. And so as of yet, there's no similarly monetizable way to make journalism online or on the iPad as valuable. You can't charge as much for the ads. So that's where the gap is.
Well, and the perception of traditional news media now, since we're bombarded with these different kind of online forums where people collect news, and it might be accurate or not. There's a danger in that. It's like the wild, wild west out there on online. But in terms of the content and the reputation of these papers, the New York Times, the reputation. I remember Le Cirque, and when they opened their new restaurant, I think in your documentary, they were shattered by, if I remember correctly, they were kind of shattered by a tepid review in the Times, and they felt kind of doomed by it.
Right.
Do you feel the reputation of the Times has suffered in this crisis?
Well, I actually think that one of the things that we really tackle head on are the failures in reporting in the run-up to the war, to the Iraq War, and Judy Miller's coverage of the weapons of mass destruction. One of the things that she said in her own defense was that she was accurately reporting what her sources told her. And of course, that's not really a sufficient sort of threshold. We're relying on journalists at the Times to truth squad the information that they're getting from their sources. One of the tagline for the film, Participant Media is one of our co-distributors, and they came up with this tagline called "Consider the Source." And I think that's relevant to, typically we think of that in the form of like, well, I read something online, I'm not really sure what the website was or where it came from, so, we should consider the source of that information. But even when it exists in the New York Times itself, with Twitter, with being able to comment on the Times website, there are so many different tools that we have now, whether it's reviewing original documents, that everyone can be a very empowered reader and consumer of information. And so I think that the Times realizes that, and that's, Bill Keller, who's the executive editor now, took over from Hal Raines, who presided over Judy Miller and Jason Blair, and there's a newfound or a renewed sense of the importance of getting it right, of quality journalism, of reporting from the site of places like Egypt or Libya, where the news is taking place at great, personal, physical peril in many cases. So I actually think that the credibility of these institutions has increased as they have admitted to their own sort of fallibility in many cases.
Right.